Good Monday to you, everybody in Gov 603. Welcome to week pow 3. How's everybody doing? New day, new week, same semester. So, much better. All right. I'm back again, Dr. Jeff Gardner, now your sufficiently caffeinated instructor. Let's take a look at this week, and then we'll take a look back at last week. All right. First things first. I have read through most of your research design proposals, posted in week 2. Okay. What was it? Last Saturday or Saturday night, 11:59. I will give you written feedback probably before close of Tuesday. So give me one more day. Okay, but I have a couple of general observations for everybody right now. First and foremost, and this is really important to keep in mind as you go ahead with the first part of your whole paper. So we're not doing 2 papers, remember, this is the first part of 1 paper. Do not turn in draft work for this assignment. Turn in what would be finished work. Similarly, for those of you who are throwing out draft proposals, or in some cases, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, who can give me some ideas, here's my stuff, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what you want to be up to, because that's not what we're up to. I may have said this before, so forgive if I'm repeating myself. The gift of academic work, academic research, is at the same time the burden. And the gift is you can study anything you want. All right. It's up to you. Part of what you're doing in working a master's degree is you're learning the means by which you explain to other people's why this, the topic, say, that you're settled on and you're focused on, is important enough to deserve their time as a reader and their time as a thinker. That starts with you deciding what the topic is, and that's the gift. You get to decide whatever it is that you want. The obligation is just that. You've got to construct the presentation of the why is this idea important in such a way that it seems important to me, not me simply as your instructor, but me as the reading audience, and then by extension everybody else. And starting from a position of, I'm not really sure what I want to do. What does everybody else think? Yeah, you're missing the first part of the opportunity, is the obligation. Okay? So, and now if you're stuck, all right, and this is also part of what we're learning, is how to stare at a blank page, so to speak, and get the idea out. And if you're really stuck and you're hung up on it, reach out to me by way of email, and we'll kick around some ideas to, knock you loose. Okay. One of the best ways to start explaining a research topic and explaining it to yourself is to start with a hypothesis or a research question. And that was in the readings and the discussion for this last week. But remember that, hypotheses can be thought of as close-ended propositions. That is, they make a definitive prediction, and then they're going to test that prediction about the relationship between at least 2 variables. Research questions can be seen as open-ended questions, open-ended propositions, where it's just a what is this, or what would happen if, rather than a prediction. So one of the best ways to start a research topic is, think about the topic in general, and then put together a hypothesis. Make a prediction. And that prediction, it doesn't look, and remember, your goal is not to be right in the prediction. Your goal is to test the prediction. So make a prediction, and that prediction will tell you, will sort of point you in the direction of what kind of literature do you have to look up for your literature review? What kind of test, research design would you need to answer the question? So as you're developing your research design proposal, give yourself a hypothesis. And remember, we'll get to this later on in the questions from last week, how a hypothesis works. Okay. For this week's reading number 3, I want you to pay particular attention to the question, the little video that goes with it on the Pareto distribution. And in particular, the reason that I give that to you, first of all, to understand what it is, what that distribution is, in the political sphere, why does it matter? Well, I want you to think about that in relationship to the problem of poverty. And politically speaking, socially speaking, persistent and widespread poverty is never a good thing. I mean, it's not a good thing on a human level, but in particular, in a society, in a time and place in which information flows back and forth so freely and so quickly, awareness of differences between those that have and don't are accelerated, and often the tensions that come with an awareness of the difference between those that have and those that don't are also accelerated and magnified. And that's not good for political and social stability. Okay? So the question, that occupies a lot of our attention politically, culturally, entertainment-wise in the present century is the question of poverty and what to do about it. Okay, politically speaking, the question arises. I don't want to give too much away as to what we're driving at here, but the question arises is how do we do something about it, and what can we really do given the governing laws of things like the Pareto distribution? So when you watch the video, just watch for that. Okay, and we're gonna spend some more time on that back in next video when we get to the readings from week 3. Okay, all right. Let's take a look at week 2, at the questions and some of your answers, and see what we can fill in to help by way of understanding and even expansion. Okay. Question number 1: define empirical research and why does it need, quote, a design? Okay, Rebecca, I think you went first, so we'll take you first. Empirical research is that which uses structured observations from the real world to attempt to answer questions. Okay, that's good. Good answer. So if you happen to see this on a test, wink, then you'd know how to answer that question, saying, how do you define empirical research? Okay. This type of research is not concerned with normative questions, but rather with discernible data. Normative questions meaning, sort of not hypothetical, but philosophical questions. Now, there's a lot of what we do in our society and a lot of the debates that we have, which are very much grounded in philosophical questions and propositions, and not at all in something empirical. Right? So it's not that the one data has supplanted the other. Right? And I'm going to get to that a little bit more, but let's go back to you, Rebecca. Researchers should be careful to structure their research in a way that actually answers the original question. Back to your hypothesis. Good. Poorly designed research will reap unclear results and may lead to the collapse of the entire project. Okay, good. Let me add. That's a good answer, Rebecca. Okay, but let me add this. I don't want to give you the impression, as we go through this class, that empirical research is the only research. And what we mean by way of research is the process by which we come to know or understand something. All right, empirical research is not the only way of knowing. But in the West, which is where we are and who we are, we're all Westerners because this is the culture that we're steeped in. Over the last, 300-400 years, and especially in our current century, we have an obsession And I would say, I would even argue, an unacknowledged obsession. Most people don't even know that it's there. With establishing constants, saying, this is always this and that is always that, and and believing that the way I'm sorry, I'm taking a little something from my throat here. Altoid, curiously strong. Anyway, we have an obsession with constants, that is believing and being certain that this is always this and that is always that, and assuming that knowledge of a thing is in large part the descriptive nature of the thing, rather than what does this thing mean to me in terms of action. Let me give you an example, okay, of the second part, and then I'll get to this. We have an obsession with constants, assuming things are constant. Okay, so all right, let's say that this was not a tin of peppermint candies. All right. Let's say that it was, like an actual medicine. It was an actual cough drop. All right. And let's say that you had a child, and the child is walking around exploring her world, and she sees this, it's colorful, and it's, got this nice red border, big bold lettering, with sort of green peppermint symbol here. The child sees this, very attractive. It's kind of shiny, right? And the child wants to figure out what is this thing. Okay. Now she's going to pick it up. She might even put it in her mouth, right? Because that's how children tend to explore the world, is both with their hand in their mouth. The first thing that she's going to find out about what this thing is its physical dimensions, and its physical experience to her. It's metal. It's cold. It's hard, and it makes a noise. But the next thing that she's going to want to know, in fact, the majority of what she's going to want to know, is what does this thing mean to me? Is it edible? So she might bite on it. Is it a toy? Can I play with it? Now let's say that there's a parent around, and the parent sees the child pick it up. Now, if this is just a candy, the parent might say, "Oh, you want a candy?" And they give the child a candy. But let's say again that it's actual medicine. The parent would say, "No, no, 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 no," and take that away from the child, because the contents therein, let's say if it's medicine, what this means to the child by way of experience, the parent is saying, is poison, is illness. Because if they gobble, if kids gobble down a bunch of prescription medicine, that's not good. That's not good for anybody. Okay? Now, the child doesn't understand prescription medicine as opposed to candies. That's why you have to keep them out of the reach of children, that is prescription medicine. But in telling the child, no, 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 the parent has just taught something to the child about what this means to them. It's a forbidden item. Now, why is that a forbidden item? The child may wonder. Well, the answer sometimes for children is because the authority figure, the parent, says so. And that suffices to answer the question. Oftentimes it does not. So we spend a lot of our time, in fact, more, I think, than we understand, than we realize, wondering about what, in terms of the meaning of a thing, less about its physical dimensions and more about what it means to us. That's perfectly valid, in fact, very useful understanding. Because again, back to the child, the question is, what does this mean to me? Is it food or is it poison? All right. Empirical research spends very little time, in fact, very little, getting at the question of what does something, the meaning of something as grounded in what does it mean to me, and spends most of its time in describing the physical dimensions of the thing. In other words, in empirical research, cataloging, first coming to know, then cataloging the physical dimensions of the thing is the meaning of the thing. All right? But that's not a complete picture. That is not the meaning of the thing, because that's not how we relate to meaning of the thing when we encounter a thing. Do you understand? So empirical research is not the do-all and end-all, and there's some assumptions built into it, like, say, constants, which are not really constants at all. Let me recommend a couple of books to you if this interests you. The first one is this one by Rupert Sheldrake. He's a British scientist, and it's called The Science Delusion. Now, Sheldrake, as a scientist, is not saying that science is delusional and you shouldn't, have any dealings with the empirical method. No, but he's pointing out that a lot of what people assume that science does and is not what it is or what it does. So, for instance, he points out that there is not really a constant speed of light, as far as we know. In fact, when we measure it and we look at the measurements over time, it seems to change. Now, relative to us, it's fractional change, but it's not exactly the same all the time in all places. Likewise, the gravitational constant is not a constant. Okay, I mean, think about it. We speak of, say, the physical measurement of the space around us, the planet that we live on, and one of the standard defining terms is elevation. How tall or not tall is something? And all of those measurements, elevation, whether it's in feet or meters, are given relative to sea level. So if I say, like this last summer, I went over a mountain that was nearly 14,000 feet, and I did. 14,000 feet relative to what? Okay, well, somebody say relative to sea level. Okay, relative to sea level where? Gulf of Mexico or the Oregon coast? Somewhere off of Britain or the Philippines? Because it's different. All right, the level of the sea, depending on where the moon is and where you are on the planet at any given time, varies a lot. So, we have this sort of obsessive, almost assumptive, meaning, sorry if I just made up a word, assuming that there are constants, and empirical research is out to discover them and operate with them. That's not necessarily true. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to come to understand what empirical research is, because in doing so, especially in political science, we're coming to an understanding of how the human mind works. See, it's really not, for our purposes, it's not terribly important whether, say, the assumption of a constant, that the constant is constant or not. It's what does the mind think of the constant? What does the mind assume? So, for instance, if we say that people think that our system is a democracy, and it really, and on the federal level, it is not. It's a representative republic. Okay, it's what the people think the system is that is our business as political scientists. You understand? All right. So that's the first point. Secondly, or first thing to look at. Secondly, if you're intrigued with the idea of how it is that we derive meaning about ourselves in the world, and this sort of split between meaning the physical dimensions of things, and meaning what does this thing mean to me, which is what most of our time is spent ferreting out. Let me recommend this book to you. This is Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning. Some of you may have heard of this guy. He is, to my mind, probably one of the premier intellects of our age, and is he still living and writing. It is a complicated book. All right, it will take you a while to read, and you may benefit from reading it more than once. I've read it 3 times myself, and what Dr. Peterson is up to in this book is he says, okay, how is it that we from what do we derive meaning of who we are and what we should do? So there's a lot of fundamental political science in this book. because understand, politics comes from the Greek term, the comings and goings, the interactions, the how do we work with ourselves inside the polis, and that means city. It doesn't mean that politics are just for people that live in cities, but that's where the Greeks were thinking about it. Okay, it's centers of governance, if you like. So Jordan Peterson says, okay, how is it that we have derived meaning about who we are, why we are here, and what we're supposed to be doing in relationship to one another? These are the fundamental foundational stones that political science sits on, or the operation of politics sits on. And he points out in this book, in Maps of Meaning, that throughout most of our history, the way to find who are we and why are we here and what should we be doing was through acting out, was through physical action by the individual, by the collective, in relationship to the thing they were trying to figure out, rather than a descriptive of its physical characteristics. I mean, if a political system has physical characteristics, because a system doesn't have physical characteristics like, say, this box has physical characteristics. And not only is it interesting to go, oh, okay, that's how, and he looks at societies all around the planet. That's how they thought. But it's also illuminating, because as he points out in the book, that this tendency, that is how our minds work, to ground meaning in what is my relationship to the thing and what does it mean to me, has not gone away. He makes the argument that we have sort of pushed it out of the forefront of our consciousness and replaced it with an assumption that the way to find meaning is to describe the physical nature of things. And he's not, it's not a book about politics, but he makes the point that part of why we have the troubles that are particular to our age is that we're trying to derive meaning from about things and systems by finding out about their physical properties, but operating over here in our minds is what we're really driving at, is what does this mean? What does this thing mean to me? And he's not advocating we should stop doing this and start doing that. He's just saying, look, if you want to understand the politics of the 20th and the 21st century, you have to understand that there's that tension within the political mind. It's a very, very interesting book. But again, it's not a straightforward read. It's a very complicated book. It's a very scholarly book. It's worth your time, though, to read it more than once. Okay, let's move on. Question number 2. Why is it hard for some researchers to see their blind spots? Richard, you went first. Let's take you first. It's hard for researchers to see their blind spots because ignorance is invisible to us. Also associated with arrogance and pride, which is the opposite of humility. Truth becomes an element in one's own mind rather than identified through scientific or empirical research. Okay, excellent answer. So an important point to bear in mind as you go ahead with your research design projects. As a researcher, your job is to be an investigator, not an advocator. Do not be an advocator in your research. Don't do it in your research paper. I will call you on it like that. Now, I want to be very clear about what I'm saying. I'm not saying you don't have passions for things. I'm not saying that there isn't a right or wrong. I'm not saying that there isn't a truth with a capital T. There most definitely is. In fact, it's a self-referential proposition, meaning the statement contradicts itself to say it is true that there is no truth. Do you get that? It is true that there is no truth. Well, how could it be true that there is no truth if there is no truth? There is truth with a capital T. All right. There are things that are right and things that are wrong, that are moral and amoral. Absolutely. And you have your passions in your area that you want to focus on. Absolutely. Right on. But for the purpose of research and being a researcher, you must be neutral. You must be an investigator. You must ask questions that open up understanding, and then test those questions. You don't have to prove the hypothesis. You just have to test the hypothesis. All right? I mean, if you were actually going to enact your research design. Don't be an advocator. Be an investigator. All right, question number 3. How do you formulate a hypothesis? How is a hypothesis different from a research question? Create a hypothesis and post it with your answer. Okay, Tyler, like what you did here, hypothesis and research questions are very similar. Sort of. We'll get to that in just a second. Hypothesis is a statement where a researcher makes a prediction about how multiple sets of variables interact and can be tested using scientific method. A research question is very similar. However, results are based on observation and experiments. An example of a hypothesis could be, quote, as drug sorry, my fault. You wrote it perfectly. As drug crimes are decriminalized, the number of people in our society with a drug addiction will increase. Excellent. So remember, there are 3 parts to a hypothesis. Number 1, it has at least 2 variables. And what do we mean by variable? Variable is just a dressed up word for something that happens. And that something can be an actual thing, like the building falls over, or an emotional state, like I feel like this. Okay, something is different than it was, a second back in the past. So it's a relationship between 2 variables that is causal. The one causes the other. The one causes the other. You make a prediction in a hypothesis concerning these 2 variables, that the one causes the other, not that the one, not like I'm going to walk around. If I walk around with this rock, okay, then this rock keeps tigers away, so I carry this rock. Okay, that's not causal. All right? That's correlation. That is, I happen to have this rock, and I happen to not see any tigers, but the one doesn't cause the other. So 2 variables with a causal prediction that has a direction. So back to your example, Tyler. As drug crimes are decriminalized, the number of our people in society with drug addictions will increase. Okay, that's going in a specific direction. We could flip it around and say the hypothesis is, as the number of people with drug addictions in our society increases, the more drug crimes will be decriminalized. That's the other way. All right, and by the way, if you're doing an actual project, outside of designing this research, and you want to test bidirectional hypotheses, knock yourself out. Just write 2 hypotheses. Hypothesis 1, hypothesis 2. That goes on all the time. Okay, a research question. They're sort of similar. Think about it this way: research questions are open-ended questions. You don't know the answer. You don't make any prediction. You could have, say, a research question here is, do drug crimes increase when drugs are decriminalized? Yes or no? All right. So they're similar in a way. So think of it this way: research questions are open-ended. Hypotheses are close-ended because they make a prediction. It's not like, well, just anything could happen. And that might be when you test the hypothesis. Anything happened other than what you predicted. That's okay. Then you say the hypothesis wasn't supported. Or in research speak, you say the null hypothesis was supported, meaning this is going to happen, not. Okay? All right, good answer, Tyler. Question number 4. Why should good research begin with a literature review? List and briefly explain the elements of a good literature review. And I want you to pay particular attention to this, especially as you're writing up the first part of your paper. And if you're unsure, again, I'm here to help you. If you're unsure as to what a literature review is, I've included some links that take you to places. And if you still, once you're root to that, you go, yeah, I really don't get it, then reach out to me by email. Okay. Robin, let's take a look at what you did here. The book Political Science Research Methods, and this is Johnson et al., tells us that starting with a literature review can reveal whether or not we have chosen a topic that is too broad and difficult to manage. Remember what I've said before? That's a good point, Robin. All research is bound by limitations, and the 2 limitations which bind all research are time and access. Do you have the time to get to the stuff you need to answer the questions? And if you start looking through what other people have done, you go, holy cow, I got to speak ancient Hittite. Well, I can't access this material. Okay, you're not going to be able to answer the question. Okay, broad and difficult to manage, or too narrow, requiring us to move to a more general one by looking at what others have studied or not studied, their explanations about relationships between variables involved in behaviors or phenomena, their definitions and concepts, source of data, designs used for research can give us clues as to how our research could add to the body that exists or possibly refute it. Okay, let me stop right there because that's an excellent point too, Robin. As researchers, you always want to look for the gap, that is, where something hasn't been looked at, or where in your informed estimation, not your opinion, your informed estimation, that someone has got it wrong. All right, and this is, they make this proposition, and then this conclusion. You go, yeah, that is not how it's working. Okay, the conclusion of chapter 3 says that our report should discuss the sources that provide explanation for the phenomenon you are studying, and the support is plausible to your hypothesis. Okay, and then you go back to, Robin, you go back to Johnson et al., and you say, Johnson et al. Also gives us logical order to examine the review they provide on the previous page to establish conventional wisdom. The status of nature of politics has changed, while the conventional understanding has not. Identified flaws in the previous research that can be corrected. Yeah, excellent answer. Sort of think about it like this. A literature review is like you stepping into a party or a room with a bunch of people hanging out, and you've got something that you want to discuss, and that's being discussed now in the room, rather than just crashing in and going, "Hey, everybody, guess what?" Spend some time listening to the conversations that are going on around this topic. What have others said? What have they not said? What could very well, might be. I mean, have you ever had this? I've had it. You think of something and you go, my word, what an epiphany, what a realization. And then you look it up and you realize, everybody else has been discussing this for like the last 30 years. Okay. You don't want to look foolish and say, aha! And everybody else is like, yeah, dude, we've only been talking about that for like the last half hour. Listen to the conversation that's going on around what it is you want to look at. Okay. And then sort through the literature. And then when you write it up, you're presenting it as a narrative. And now, this is not the way to do it, but this is one of the more helpful ways. You order your literature review in more or less a sequential fashion that follows how it is you're going to talk about the problem. So let's say, for instance, your research design is you want to look at how do voting times, that is when the polls open and when the polls close, affect voter turnout. And you hypothesize that voting stations that close before 7 p.m. Reduce voter turnout. That's the hypothesis. Okay. Well, the first thing you want to do in first reading up on the literature and then writing it up and presenting it is you want to present what others have done concerning this topic. I mean, has anybody else looked at this already? Have they already put forward the hypotheses and answered the very ones that you put forward? I hope not, because now you're just, doing stuff that's already been done. So that's the first part of your literature review. Then the second part of your literature review is you want to look at what others have said about the individual components of the issue. So the big issue is voting time close versus voter turnout. So what are some of the components? We can take this sequentially. It helps you organize it. Okay. So maybe the first one is, well, the literature around when voting booths open says that this, I'm making this up, this has no impact. The literature around how long in terms of total hours, so let's say it opens at 5 a.m. and closes at 5 p.m., how long it stays open shows that there is an impact. The literature around the closing time, and now you sort of like a funnel. So you start out here with the big questions, and then each of the parts of the study that you've designed. And you come right down to, and the literature around closing time suggests that. I'm going to test the following hypothesis by, and then you introduce a research method. Okay, that's a literature review. And if again, if you're not understanding that, or you have a hard time wrapping your head around it, and sometimes what people do is they confuse a literature review for an annotated bibliography. Don't do that in your paper. If you have any questions as to how to construct a literature review and how to distinguish it from, say, an annotated bibliography, reach out to me. We'll get you fixed up. Okay. All right, everybody, that is it for this week. Good luck with your research design projects. Okay. If you have any questions, please email me or just, call me during my office hours. Always happy to talk. Okay. So I think about you often. I pray about you. Some of you have let me know that you're dealing with a little more than the usual. So I'm praying for you. Those of you who emailed me, you were particularly in my prayers. Okay. And have a great week. And I'll see you on Blackboard. All right. Bye-bye.